It makes sense this week that when we read Parashat Yitro, lots of folks around the country have been reflecting on the Ten Commandments. Even the Texas state legislature seems to have a Jewish liturgical calendar and is clued into our Torah reading cycle. Because on Monday, which of course is a Torah reading day in Jewish tradition, the Texas State Senator Phil King introduced SB 10, legislation requiring that every Texas public school classroom display a framed copy of the Ten Commandments. According to the legislation, the poster must be no smaller than 16 by 20 inches, and it should be visible to a person with average vision from anywhere in the classroom. Senator King explained that the Ten Commandments are part of our Texas and American story. They are ingrained into who we are as a people and as a nation. He continued, "Today our students cry out for moral clarity, for the statement of right and wrong that these commandments represent. If our students don't know the Ten Commandments, they will never understand the foundation for much of American history and law." There's so much to say about the legal framework and political moment in which a law like this, along with a companion piece of legislation requiring prayer in Texas schools, has been introduced. There's even more to say about the history and specifically the way that Christian religious texts and prayers have been played, the role they've played in civic life since the founding of our country. And these kind of debates, they're not only playing out in Texas or Louisiana. There was a proposal just a month ago put forward by Baltimore City Council member, Minister Mark Parker, a Lutheran minister, also a council member, which would end the practice of religious invocations at the beginning of city council meetings. Parker said that he deeply values prayer as a minister, but felt that it had no place in government meetings. After a robust debate, there was a vote and Parker's proposal failed. And during the first meeting of this session of the Baltimore City Council, it began with an invocation by a well-known Baltimore rabbi, Rabbi Daniel Katzenberg. It's the rabbi of Bethel. To be fair, I should note that Rav Daniel incorporated themes of religious liberty and tolerance into his prayer, and it was quite meaningful. Debates around the role of religion and prayer in public and civic life will continue. But on this day, just a half hour ago, we stood and recited and heard the Ten Commandments together. And in our sanctuary, we prominently display the Ten Commandments above our ark. It's forced me to think clearly about my true objection to this Texas law. I have no objection to the Ten Commandments. I'm actually quite in favor. I've been thinking about a beautiful play that came out a few years ago by Heidi Schreck called "What Does the Constitution Mean to Me?" So today I'm thinking of a new play, well, at least a sermon. What do the Ten Commandments mean to me? Because I love our Torah and our religious texts. I've committed my life to studying them, to debating them, to teaching them. And I do agree with Senator King that an education which raises questions of moral clarity is a good thing, not a bad thing. And I think that an education system that asks students to think about their obligations to society, not only their rights, is a good thing, not a bad thing. And I do wish that more people thought about our religious texts and thought about how they might be transformed by them, how they might change a little bit in their encounter with them. But to require, to mandate that this specific text be displayed in this particular way, it transforms this moment of biblical divine revelation that commands us to reject idols, and well, it turns the text into an idol itself. These 10 mitzvot become an idol, a symbol of power, of Christian hegemony, and they don't really teach the fullness of what the commandments mean to our society, what they might mean if we read them holistically, perhaps even if we read them Jewishly. The Ten Commandments, in Hebrew, the Aseret HaDibrot, they've always played a central yet contested role in Jewish liturgy and theology. The moment of revelation represents the paradox of intimacy and also mystery with God. Revelation, it's not hierarchical, but it's pluralistic. The entire community of Israel is present at the foot of Mount Sinai. The entire community, including those in future generations and those who have not yet become Jews, they all stood together. We all stood together. When we retell the story of Sinai, we believe that we are not only reenacting a mythic or historical past, but retelling a narrative in which we ourselves took part. The commandments are given accompanied by loud noises and lights and smoke. And this moment becomes a turning point in our collective history. From this day forth, the Israelites and God have a mature relationship built on a brit, on a covenant. We will, of course, fall short, but from this moment on, we're connected to each other through not only a sense of love, but also responsibility. The story of Revelation, it's about distance and mystery as well. The Israelites prepare to receive the commandments for 3 days, and when the moment finally arrives, they're told that they can come close to Mount Sinai, but that they can't touch the mountain. Their distance, it represents the intangibility of Revelation. And after the 10 Commandments are transmitted, the Israelites, so overwhelmed by what they've just heard and seen and felt, they take steps back from the mountain, and they ask Moses to receive the rest of the commandments and transmit it to them later. Biblical scholar Benjamin Salmer suggests that the Torah is intentionally ambiguous about what the Israelites actually heard at Mount Sinai. The text explains that God responded to Moses and the Israelites using a kol, the Hebrew word kol. It's a word that can both describe a voice and also the sound of thunder. So if a kol is the sound of thunder, if God communicates through a thunder, it's possible that the Israelites heard the intensity of revelation without directly hearing its content on that day. Somer also explains that the plea of the Israelites to have Moses serve as an intermediary to share the rest of the mitzvot, it may not come after the revelation and the recitation of the 10 Commandments, but during. Perhaps the overwhelm of revelation was so intense that the Israelites simply could not hear it. They needed it to be interpreted for them. In his final analysis, Dr. Sommer concludes that the text, the biblical text, is intentionally ambiguous. He writes, Exodus does not want the audience to know whether the law-giving was direct, mediated, or a mix of the two. The book does, however, encourage the audience to wonder about this issue, think through various possibilities, and perhaps to think about their implications. Exodus endorses a question, but not an answer, a debate, but not a resolution. I find Somer's proposal provocative and quite true, because even contemporary readers who hear all of the commandments in the text, we know that to live them, we must first engage in an interpretive process as well. The 10 Commandments of the book of Shmot, they don't represent the end of moral clarity, as Texas senators might hope, but rather the opening salvo of an interpretive tradition towards a more just, a more moral society. The moment of revelation, it's not the final word on our morality, it's just the first 10 sentences. It's followed by 603 more after that, then generous and generations of interpretation and debate. It continues to this very day. The rabbis also understood that even in these 10 simple statements, that even as they were given, it represented the beginning of an interpretive tradition. The Talmud explains, when the Torah writes the words, and God spoke these words, it says, Ele divarim, these words in the plural, we should not read it as the words of the 10 Commandments, but rather as all of the interpretations of the 10 Commandments. The rabbis of the Talmud, they recast this moment of revelation of Sinai not only as a transmission of specific moral words alone, but as a transmission of a fully interpretive process in which the Israelites might seek moral clarity. So why then do we have the Ten Commandments on the top of our ark? Certainly for their moral value. They represent, as the philosopher Abraham Ben Chia explained, a matrix of how a person and God might interact, how a person and their family might interact, and how a person and their neighbor might interact through thought, speech, and action. In their own way, the Ten Commandments represent a totality of our ethics. But I think that they're displayed in our sanctuary because they represent the moment of revelation. They ask us not to dwell exclusively on the particular moment that we read about in the book of Exodus, but rather to treat every interaction that we have in the sanctuary as a continuation of that initial login. The Ten Commandments insist that we feel the weight of the two tablets, that we continue to carry that burden, and we expand upon it. This is what the Ten Commandments mean to me. I'm not sure that the Texas legislature, the Louisiana legislature, or all those who wish to require the hanging of the commandments could understand this. More importantly, I don't think that they really want to. Enforcing the hanging of the Ten Commandments in public schools, they ironically violate the very text that they wish to display. Displaying the commandments in this way through legislation, it makes the Ten Commandments themselves an idol. They remove the interpretive tradition they wish to make them unchanging. Insisting that displaying this language in this way, it seems much more to be a statement of force about what kind of country we should be, about who is included, and most importantly, who is excluded, who is not welcome here. And as we've seen in these last few weeks, that question, who is excluded, has really become an obsession. And as Jews, we know that building societies that welcome and include the stranger, that make sure that we provide special care to those who are traditionally overlooked, we know that it's not only part of our biblical mandate, it's an essential lesson from our own history. This kind of law, along with others, suggests that some believe that America is a Christian nation at the exclusion of non-Christians. And even cloaking it in language that the Bible, even cloaking that language in the Bible, it shouldn't deter us Jews who also love the Bible from calling it out when we see it. But just as important, I think we should ponder the question that the senators purport to ask. How do we build a more moral society? One in which we don't devote ourselves to false idols, we honor our elders, in which we aspire not to covet, on which we don't steal from each other or our planet, on which we make time for Shabbat to rest, and the other 5 commandments. This is a question that actually, it's not only answered by the commandments themselves, it's asked by them. I have no doubt that we can work to build moral communities with voices from all religions and all races and all classes, with people from different political opinions and lived experiences. Those communities that we build will write beautiful commentary on these 10 commandments. And through that process, we'll make the world more whole. So let's not only put the commandments on the wall, let's bring them into our hearts and into our conversations. Then we'll build the moral societies of which we can be most proud. Shabbat Shalom.